TCS Legends is powered by Mitel. For all your unified communications and customer experience needs, visit mitel.com. I'm Duncan MacLeod, and I'd like to welcome you to Season 1, Episode 1 of TCS Legends, a brand new podcast series from TechCentral, powered by Mitel, that, as the name implies, chats to some of the legends who helped South Africa's tech sector become what it is today. We have some great guests lined up for Season 1 of TCS Legends over the next 8 weeks, so I invite you to subscribe to us on YouTube. You can visit youtube.com/TechCentral to do that. You can also get us through your favorite podcasting app. Simply search TechCentral, one word, in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Pocket Casts, or wherever you happen to get good podcasts, and you will find all of our shows, including TCS Legends. Now, I thought a good place to start a series on tech legends, would be a discussion with someone who has worked closely with many of them in South Africa over the years. And in fact, he's a bit of a legend in his own right. I first met him when he was a director at Merrill Lynch and was the country's top-rated IT analyst at the time. Since then, he's been involved in innumerable ventures in financial services, including the launch of Macquarie First South. He describes himself today simply as a director of companies. Dr. Duarte da Silva, welcome to TCS Legends, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
As mentioned, Dwart has known and still knows many of the legends in the local technology industry. We're going to be having a look at a small subset of those people today. But before we do that, Dwart, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. You have a PhD, if I'm not mistaken, from Wits University. It's a PhD in engineering, if I'm not mistaken. What was the focus of your study there?
Yes, I've got a PhD in fluid mechanics, Department of Mechanical Engineering. I lectured for 2 years as well. Mm-hmm. I managed to complete my PhD at the age of 25 and then proceeded never to work as an engineer in my life.
Okay. You'd been to Marist Brothers, is that right?
Marist Brothers Observatory, subsequently called Sacred Heart.
Okay. And so why did you study engineering if you never became an engineer?
I was good at maths, I was good at science, and in terms of career guidance, it was either doing a straight BSc or doing something that perhaps could be commercially viable as a profession.
Right.
And literally, career guidance was so poor that I took a bash. After one day at lectures, I realized I never wanted to work as an engineer. But, my parents couldn't afford for me to flip-flop, so it was done.
So you finished it.
So I finished it.
All right. Have you ever been able to put the fluid dynamics as a what do you call it, as a discipline into anything you do professionally?
Engineering is a great background, and specifically because it teaches you how to solve problems. Mm-hmm. And I've seen people with great educations that do not have that simple skill. An engineer basically takes the known knowledge about science and mathematics and creates something, mm-hmm. solves a problem that is needed in society or for a particular use.
Mm-hmm. Well, take us through your career history. I first met you when you were a director at Merrill Lynch. I think it was in 1995, if I remember correctly. It might have been 96 or 7. Actually, I just joined the Financial Mail, so it would have been 1997. You were IT analyst. You were, I think, the first IT analyst in the country. Certainly you helped define the category. There was no, you were saying before we started recording, there was no IT category on the JSE and everything was sitting under engineering and electronics. What was it like in those days covering the tech industry and writing about these fairly nascent companies at that time, which have gone on to become multi-billion rand enterprises?
So I started in broking in October 1994. Having had a limited and brief career in management consulting, mm-hmm. which actually was very useful, and entered into the industry at that stage as the electrical and electronics sector analyst and the motor analyst.
Okay.
So my very, very first report was actually on Toyota. Which was read by absolutely nobody because it had a market cap of about R1 billion, a free float of about 20 cents, and one shareholder, which happened to be Alan Gray.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so your first report on the tech sector was on who?
So my first report on the tech sector was actually on Dimension Data.
Okay.
I wrote my first piece in February 1995, went to go and meet with Jeremy Ord, mm-hmm. and had a rundown in terms of what the business was. I believe that, if I recall correctly, they'd just bought SPL, a listed software company at the time. And from that, I immediately went and identified similar sector companies in the electronic sector, being Siltec, Dimension Data, QData, IBM, and a company called Persitech. And I subcategorized those as IT companies because there wasn't any such classification at the time. And then I produced a sector piece. Stemming from that, we were sponsoring brokers to a company called Altron, and they got very upset that I wrote my first piece on a company that wasn't there. So I had to do a piece on Altron.
And Bill Venter. Who we're going to talk about in this first episode of TCS Legends today. I'm looking forward to that. But take us through briefly the rest of your career. What did you do after you left Merrill's?
In 1998, I'd been poached by two listed entities, being Peregrine and African Harvest, to set up a technology private equity fund, which we set up, called Tata. Tata had a short life because we then reversed it into McCarthy Bank. I became the deputy chairman of McCarthy Bank, and Cyril Ramaphosa became the chairman through my introduction. And the idea was to convert this banking license into a specialist tech investment business. We did that for 3 years, and we had a very successful listing offshore of a company called IOCOR. And as a consequence of that success, the partners all decided that they no longer wanted to be in business with one another, and things got a little bit unpleasant. So in 2001, I left to join the J&J Group. Initially as a consultant, they wanted me to join as a participant in J&J. I declined that offer.
This was the two Naidus, Jay Naidu and
Jay Naidu and Jayendra Naidu, correct. And eventually I agreed to consult to them effectively as their chief investment officer. After 2 years, a former colleague of mine, James Lubbert, the top-rated bankings analyst, also joined the team, and we said, you know what, why don't we form a new financial services business that's steeped in, we don't need to convert anything, we'll create it from the ground up, and that was the start of First South. First South then became Macquarie First South, and then and we grew that as a successful investment bank together with our Australian partners. In end of 2015, Macquarie decided that they wanted to own 100% of the business, and so we were bought out 6 days before Mr. Nene was fired, and we essentially exited the business.
Okay, good timing.
Great timing.
So timing is everything in investment, right?
Absolutely right, and I haven't always got that right.
Okay, so what have you been up to since then?
My health was, I went through a bad health patch, but I've kept busy notwithstanding some serious health issues. But I took up the role of the chairman of a listed company called Huge, which I left about a year ago. And the idea initially was that I would become actively involved in that business to turn it into an investment business. It kind of didn't work out that way, and so I decided to leave last year. And, I've been involved in numerous other ventures, but I guess my health only fully recovered beginning of last year.
Yeah.
And so I've been focusing on a number of things, ranging from mining projects to my latest venture, which is in the asset management industry. Not really a new venture because there was a business called Element Asset Management, which I became a shareholder through First South in 2008. And I'm just reigniting that relationship and working with the team and new participants to build up that asset management business, essentially financial services.
Okay. You mentioned your health scare. You lost your left arm 4 years ago. I was hoping to meet Alfred today, who's the bionic replacement, but it's Alfred, I believe, is in for some service. Tell us a bit about that process and what happened and as much as you're prepared to share, of course.
Yeah, no problem. I developed a condition in my mid-20s, which was essentially a vascular malformation. It was obviously there from birth, but with no visible or physical sensation there too. What it is basically a direct links between the arteries and veins.
Okay.
And over the years, I had numerous procedures. The condition is reasonably rare, and each procedure I had was by competent and solid professionals, but with limited knowledge of the condition. So every time I had a procedure, it got worse. And over the years, I must have had ranging north of 50 operations and procedures.
Sure.
Every time would give temporary relief and then get worse. So being a vascular condition, and I guess having a doctorate in fluid mechanics helped me understand it a little bit, but probably the worst possible activity for a condition of that sort is flying because of the change in barometric pressure. And guess what I had to do on a regular basis? In my Macquarie First South career, I was probably flying down to Cape Town to visit our business once a week, and I was flying overseas at least once a month. And it was extremely painful.
Yeah.
So the condition, essentially, I just learned to live with it, but it got worse and worse and worse until eventually it was unmanageable and it started to basically explode and bleed. And I needed some treatment.
And very painful as well, I presume.
And very painful. So I started to have some physical treatments. Unfortunately, I picked up the hospital superbug in 2019.
Oh, no.
That affected my heart. And during the operation, the arm actually became unmanageable. Roll a few months forward, it just essentially needed to be amputated. It was either that or lose my life. And actually the best thing I possibly could have done, because essentially 1 week after getting out of hospital was the last time I took a painkiller.
Oh, wow. And your bionic arm, is that the right term for it?
It is, yes.
How did you meet Alfred? What's the backstory there?
Essentially, funnily enough, the healthcare for amputees is absolutely awful. If you go and look at your policy, all of us that have medical aid probably take it on the basis of general cover. And there's about 1 million things that can go wrong with you. And I can guarantee you that not every one of us has gone through and looked at each one of the subsets. But if you go and look at your policy, I guarantee you that the limit that you will get on a prosthesis is 22,000 Rand.
Wow.
And that is across the board.
Wow.
And I can promise you that that doesn't even get you a toenail.
Probably your first consultation with a specialist doctor.
So essentially, I consulted a number of orthotists. They made a couple of recommendations. Unfortunately, I met a bit of a charlatan who then ran away to Australia, leaving me with a 2 million Rand device that couldn't work.
Oh, no.
And then I found an guardian angel who basically has, over the last 2 years, taken a device that wasn't actually suitable for me, made it work. And he has done so actually free of charge. He's an incredible individual. It was quite a thing to go through. You've gone through the trauma of losing a limb and trying to, can't get to grips with that, and you're actually getting ripped off, and it's actually also in the middle of COVID.
Oh,
so no insurance company wants to hear from you. No, I've laid criminal charges, but as these things go, if you don't have a special contact, and if you don't use the R200 form, you're probably not going to get anywhere.
So what does Alfred do? Do you have full functionality in your arm?
Having had the amputation above the elbow, it means I've got essentially two joints. So there is a motor on the elbow that one needs to activate, and it's activated through sensors in the socket that connect to your muscles. So you learn essentially like a manual car, to activate it through twitching in a particular sequence. So you can move the elbow up and down. Then I don't have the wrist rotator. I just do that manually. But then there are motors in each one of the joints of the 5 fingers, which enable you to do pretty sophisticated movements. So I can do that on a mouse. I can hold things. I can do a shoelace.
Wow.
And it is, of course, intensive training.
Yes.
And again, like a manual car, when you first get into a car, your dad says, put in the clutch, change the gear, take your foot off the accelerator, put your foot back in the accelerator. Gee, how am I going to remember all that? A month or two later, it becomes second nature.
Right.
So,
literally becomes muscle memory.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well,
but there are some really good people in this country, and this particular gentleman and facility has been outstanding. But I've discovered that one of the reasons why medical aid doesn't provide it, because I must reiterate that notwithstanding having the top scheme, I got my 22,000 Rand
Okay.
for 2 million Rand device, which excludes actual fitment and
Right.
consultations.
Sure. Right, Dwart, let's talk legends. There's a long list. We've spoken extensively before we recorded this episode today, and we decided to whittle it down to 5 names. But there was a list this long, and the list could probably be this long, and we're probably never going to get to everyone, and we are going to miss some names. So if we do forget about you, apologies. It's my fault, not Duart's. But names like David Can, the late founder of Mustec, Rob Shooter, who ran MTN for a while and has been involved in the sector for a number of years. Names like Ronnie Price, Serge Bellamont, Tony Farah, Andile Ntaba, Benjamin and Isaac Mopatlane, Mario Pinheiro, Mark Shuttleworth, the Levy brothers at Blue Label, Duncan Simpson-Crabe in the telecoms industry, Dana Bass and Derek Crennan of Front Range. And Work Group, I think that was the name of their business. The list goes on and on and on, but we could have spoken about all of these people today, but Dwart, we would have been sitting in the studio the entire day talking about them. So we've decided to whittle it down to 5 names. Some of the names I've already mentioned will be guests on this show, either in season 1 or perhaps season 2. But we whittled it down to 5 names of 5 people who had a really big impact in the 80s and 90s in building South Africa's technology industry. And those people who we're going to be talking about in some detail today, are Jeremy Ord and his team at Dimension Data, Roux Marnitz, who some people may not remember now. It's been a long time since he was in this industry, at least 20 years, 25 years. He was CEO of a company called Persitel, which eventually morphed into what is today BCX, part of Telkom. We're going to have a look at Bill Venter, the founder of Ultron, and his sons. We're going to chat about Jens Montanana, the founder of Datatech, and of course we're going to talk about Alan Knott-Craig, the former CEO of Vodacom. But we're going to start with Dimension Data, and I think it's fortuitous actually, since your first report was on Dimension Data, Dwart. So we're going to, in fact, we've got some of your old reports here from Merrill Lynch. I remember these from the old days, actually. And one of these here, was this the first report that you ever produced on Dimension Data?
That is the first report I ever produced on Dimension Data.
Is this the whole thing, or
it was just a company visit and there were subsequent detailed reports on the company, but it was essentially just a broker note.
Right.
Saying, I went to meet with management. This is what I thought. These are the highlights, and this is my recommendation.
Dated the 13th of February 1995, you had a buy recommendation on Dimension Data. They were then at 19 Rand and 75 cents. What did they peak at?
100 Rand?
About $100.
When they listed in the UK, and then there was that flash trade from 75 to 100,
okay,
because they were included in the UK index.
Okay.
So I'd already left as a broker in those days, but it was spectacular.
Yeah.
I think they peaked. I think it's more important to talk about market cap than share price, because there were a number of share issues, splits, etc. So I can't remember. I think there was a share split post that, but
okay.
Their market cap was 100 billion Rand, and I well remember my statements in the morning meeting that the market cap of Dimension Data now exceeded all the commodity companies put together in South Africa.
Wow. That was at the peak.
That was at the peak.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And then, of course, Dimension Data got into all sorts of trouble. They went and bought an American company. They got into a bidding war, I think it was, with Compaq, was it?
That's correct.
To buy an asset there. What was that business they were trying
I can't remember, but it was founded by a Mexican guy, and it was a disaster. Yeah.
It was an absolute disaster. And here's another report you did with Jacob Greenblatt. This was dated February 97. IT, going boldly where no South African company has gone before. And I love these cartoons that you used to have on the cover of these Merrill Lynch reports. Who did these for you?
It was essentially the same guy, and I can't remember his name. I'll have to look at those. But he used to do the front covers of the Financial Mail. And,
did he? Okay.
And I still have the originals in watercolor, and they're hanging in my garage.
Amazing. So this is Jeremy Ord here, walking on water. There's sharks in the water. And who is this supposed to be over here?
That is Piet den Boer of Q Data. And the reason why, there was exchange control in those days.
Yeah.
And really, he's sitting in amazement looking how Jeremy has got over all these obstacles to go and buy a stake in Comtech in Australia. And in the background, there's Madiba and Derek Keys looking on and support. But QData was essentially stranded on the South African island whilst Jeremy started his international expansion.
And I love the hat. This is symbolic of sort of Crocodile Dundee.
Essentially, exactly, buying the Australian. So, there was a lot of thought that went into these. And if you actually look at some of the pictures, for instance, in my Ultron report, Paul Pretorius of Roinet is taking a punch at Bill Venter, who's neatly sidestepping it, and Myron Burzak is the referee in the background. And you'll recall that Ultron subsequently did buy Voltex and Myron Burzak, and the CEO of Plessy is out there at the bottom sending out smoke signals, because I really didn't believe much of what he said, and that was my cryptic way of saying that.
Real legends. How many of these reports did you do in the end?
This is just a sample that I brought along for fun.
Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead with internationalization. This was who are these guys? That's Roux Marnitz.
So that was my, because subsequent to IT, I took over the industrial holdings portfolio, which at the time was the most important. And actually, at the time, I headhunted Peter Armitage to come across from Deutsches to join me to do the industrial holding sector together.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the day he joined was the day I had to leave, because he'd gone on gardening leave and I wasn't able to communicate that I'd been headhunted to set up a private equity fund. So he was not all too content with my departure, although we're still very good friends, notwithstanding.
Peter Armitage, Russell running Anchor Capital, is he?
He is the founder and running Anchor Capital very successfully.
Okay. Right, so let's talk about the legend of Jeremy Ord and his team, because he had a team of very competent people around him. When did you first meet Jeremy?
Basically, probably February 1995.
And your first impressions of him were?
Well, very amiable, smart, intelligent guy. The funny thing is, I only really got to appreciate Jeremy Ord in 2014.
Okay, why is that?
Long after we started to engage. Jeremy had a great team. And, if you go back, and I used to think about this in terms of his professional cricketing background, he's a great team captain. And actually, I had very little to do with Jeremy other than social engagement, and he's a very congenial, very amiable person. So it was great. But my interaction was really with his team, because like any good captain, he promotes his team. And in fact, many times I'd be called to do a presentation at the old Dimension Data campus, and the Wanderers building.
Yes,
and
Epps
and Downs. And I'd sit there, and there's this guy, sitting on a tall seat, and I'm presenting to his executives at a strategy session, and he's staring out the window, and I thought, geez, that's bloody rude. Roll the clock. Probably, let me work that out, probably nearly 20 years later. And now I'm engaging with him on a transaction. And now I'm sitting in my home study and we're having a discussion. And in the same, he hasn't changed one bit.
Staring out the window.
But what I realized is, I'd start explaining and said, stop, I got it. And that's really why I realized, I knew he was smart, but he's actually off the sort.
He's already ahead of you.
People think he's just a marketing guy. He's a superb marketing pilot. He's actually incredibly smart, and he is way ahead of most people. And so, many times I'd start the sentence with, yes, I've got that. Okay, we can move on. How about a glass of wine?
Okay. Okay, I remember you're right, though, when I first engaged with the company, also around the mid to late 1990s, I was interfacing with many of the people on his team. He was there all the time, but I guess I spent more time with people like Richard Kame, who was also integral to the Dimension Data business and growing that business in the early days.
Actually,
Doc Watson and other people.
Being financial, I spent a lot of time with Malcolm Rutherford, the then CFO, and then the teammates, Peter Hurd on networking, and then Robbie on the software, and then subsequently after that, when they bought Internet Solutions, would have been David Frankel. But actually, in terms of real input, it was Richard Kame.
Yeah.
And really, to me, Richard was fundamental rather than integral.
Yeah.
You know, Richard actually, what they really worked out is that don't really need to invent anything in South Africa.
Yeah.
So off they'd send Richard to the US, who'd go and look at new and evolving trends, wait for 3 or 4 or 6 months to see which are the winners, and then bring it back. Because you don't have to be leading edge over here. And that was the way that they identified Cisco as the future winner in networking, because there were a whole bunch of products at the time. And I can't even remember what they were, but there were serious competitors, whether they came from 3Com or HP.
Yeah.
And Richard had the ability with that and a variety of other things to look and bring back that to the team. And they really did operate as a cricket team. Everyone had their task, but at the end of the day, they succeeded because they were incomparable, actually, as a team. You know, if we compare that to someone like Percival, it was a very different dynamic, and we can go to that later.
In fact, as you mentioned, their head office was built around a cricket pitch. It was built in a cricket oval. Much later on, they kind of switched sports and became much more involved in golf, and then I think in cycling. I guess it's how the executives' passions changed over the years. And eventually, of course, they went on to become the technology partner for the Tour de France, and NTT, the successor to Dimension Data, is still a sponsor of that tournament. But I remember meeting with executives in the Oval in Bryanston over the years. Were they keen cricket players themselves as well?
Jeremy, you know, there was the great Transvaal cricket team. You know, that was, I can go through the names, you know, the Henry Fotherhams, the Jimmy Cooks. So Jeremy was in, and Ray Jennings, and those was basically in and out of the A and B team. That A team was probably as strong as most international cricket teams. So he was very much a professional cricket player. So he was essentially usually the captain of the B team and occasionally in the A team. So he was a great cricket player in his time. So they do have cricket in their genes.
Yeah. But Cisco, that was the key to their early success, that relationship with Cisco. I remember, who was the CEO? It was John Chambers who was the CEO of Cisco back then. And him and Jeremy were very, very close. Yeah,
look, I mean, there were a number of, and Cisco will be what they would get remembered for. Yeah. And, you know, and really there was a time, it was interesting, where I actually spoke to John Chambers. He said the 2 biggest distributors in the world of Cisco just happened to be South African companies. How incredible was that? So it was Percival.
Percival.
And Dimension Data.
Did DataTech later become a Cisco distributor as well?
They did, but long after. And, you know, not long after, but, you know, full system integrated with only those 2. And basically between the 2 of them, they had bought, you know, significant players. Dimension Data had focused on the East with the Australia and Datacraft acquisition, which I was part of the capital raise, and Percival had gone to Europe where they'd bought Telemation. So between the 2, you know, John said, you know, it's crazy, but the 2 biggest entities in the world are South Africans. And then what actually happened, what actually got Dimension Data to be recognized as a networking business only, is they went into negotiations to merge. And actually the initial discussion was a merger. Then it was a discussion about Percival buying out Dimension Data's networking operation. And eventually what actually happened was Percival sold its networking operations to Dimension Data. The consequence was that Roux Marnitz made more money out of Dimension Data than any of the Dimension Data executives ever did. That was what people don't actually know, because Roux was such a quiet, unassuming guy. So he sold for shares, and he never held his shares. So he didn't go through the boom and bust. And he confidentially told me why, but it didn't surprise me. I mean, culturally, these guys couldn't.
So were Ord and Marnitz keen competitors?
Yes, they were keen. They were respectful of one another, but completely different styles. I mean, Roux was quite, conservative.
Old school Afrikaans.
Very almost Calvinist in his approach. I mean, he had a regulation, because we'll go how Roux actually founded his business, because it's also incredible. But on the one, Roux would say, listen, guys, to his executives, if you're successful, That's great. I really want us all to be successful because it's demonstrative of what we've done. But don't land up coming to office in a sports car. I'll fire you. I said, you can buy a nice sedan and you can get good, but I don't want customers looking at your car and saying, geez, I paid for that. I don't want the poor tech guy who earns, 100th of what you earn to say, geez, I'm getting legged over here. Said, so that is the culture, whereas on the other side, the cricket, it was a lot more flashy, a lot more marketing orientated. So, and so the cultures were extremely different.
Interesting.
But Roux controlled the structure. He had executives, and they did what he told them. Jeremy was a captain that had a team, and they participated. Even though he made the decisions at the end, like a good captain does, but it was much more of a participative business.
Yes, interesting. Do you think that culture got them into trouble, especially the flashy part of it, especially when they went after the US market and it got them burnt? Do you think they were too gung-ho?
I think I did have a discussion at the time with, I wasn't an analyst anymore, but I did think going into the US was a mistake.
Especially at the peak.
And I wouldn't call it, flashy. It was a little bit of hubris.
All right.
You've now listed and, you can do anything. And I think where they got it wrong.
And share price was up here.
They were listed.
It must be easy for this to go to your head.
They'd raised $1 billion, I think.
Yeah.
$1 billion, of which I think they spent 2/3 of that on this acquisition. So, the bet was too big. Secondly, and I tried to express this, but when I sold Dimension Data in the US, I said this is an emerging market IT company because they said they do outsourcing, they do networking, they do software. What is this thing? We're not used to companies like that. You're either in networking or you're in software or you're in outsourcing. And I said, it's different in emerging markets. And I said, by the way, I believe Europe is an emerging market in IT context. I said, what does that mean? It means that in those markets, it's about trust. So the client trusts the service provider. And therefore, based on that trust, they go, okay, I've bought a mainframe from you. What about this? What about the network? What should I do? And they keep asking that provider for more and more. And so you grow your percentage share in that client rather than in the US where it's all about deep specialization and pricing. And I believe that culturally, even though we speak English and they speak English, and I think that was the attraction, and of course it's the biggest global market, and I think that was the problem. I think Dimension Data would have done far better had they bought an entity in Brazil.
Right.
Or India.
Right.
And actually, funnily enough, Roux Marnitz, just before he sold the networking business to Dimension Data, which gave them the critical mass for the UK listing, was in deep discussions, second, third cautionary, to buy a networking business in Brazil. And I believe that would have been the right decision.
Interesting. Was the US business called Proxicom?
It was called Proxicom.
It was Proxicom.
Good memory.
And it was a lemon that they bought. I mean, it was at the peak of the dot-com bubble. They paid a huge PE multiple for this business. And once they'd bought it, they discovered that not worth what they paid for.
And what they did is they found that they then landed up having all of these offices across the United States that had long-term leases. And that's what killed them.
Oh, dear.
So actually, Brett Dawson, if you remember Brett.
I do.
Brett was brought in as the CEO of Internet Solutions. And, Brett, an intelligent guy, kept criticizing the decision and what was being done. Again, this is hearsay.
Sure.
Within the Mancos. So Jeremy said, well, if you're so bloody clever, why don't you go fix it up? And that's what he did. Okay. And he did such a good job that on his return, he was essentially made the managing director of Dimension Data.
Fascinating. Yeah, he came in there was a business that launched as a spin-off of IS, I think. It was involved in some specific area of networking. The Brett Dawson was asked to look at. I think it was some VPN business, Link something.
That's right, yes.
That he brought. And then he became the MD of Internet Solutions and then eventually of the entire group.
I first met Brett when he was a financial manager, CFO designate at Angloval Industries in the biscuit business.
Wow.
Again, so a talented guy.
He's still around. I see him on Twitter from time to time.
Yes, and he is on various boards, and really, I think
that's right. He's on the board of Ultron, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah.
So he's still. We should actually get him on the show.
He's a great personality.
Interesting to chat to. But there were some really amazing, talented people who came through Dimension Data over the years, and one of those was, of course, David Frankel, who joined the group through the acquisition of Internet Solutions, and he also played quite a pivotal role in building Dimension Data into what it is today. And he's gone off and now has a very, very successful career in the US as a venture capitalist. What's your take on the IS acquisition and how that changed Dimension Data?
Yeah, at that stage, the world of the internet was just coming to the fore. In fact, funny story, I was the first analyst to actually start sending out their reports on something called email.
Okay.
All my colleagues used to arrive at 5 o'clock in the morning and fax it to their clients. And so the company had no email address. I used to have an icon address, which actually was Internet Solutions.
I remember that.
Which actually started as Mosaic, and Mosaic became Icon. And I'm still got my same icon. And I used to send out my reports. And, and because I was dealing with IT analysts on the other side, they also had their personal IT. Got into a lot of compliance problems for that afterwards. But, so... Internet Solutions was the pioneer of the time. They were based there in Rosebank, if you recall. It was a couple of 25, a whole bunch of 25.
It was Ronnie Apteker and his brother Alon Apteker.
Yeah.
I think Alon was the MD, joint MD with David, if I remember right.
That's right, Alon.
But Ronnie actually started Internet Solutions. He was the founder. But
Lior Atti was the financial director.
That's right.
And so none of them actually, they were all below 30. All straight of university, and they decided to start this up.
Yeah.
And I might get my numbers wrong, but Dimension Data bought the first 25% for 25 million rand, and this thing made losses. So,
I think they paid 400 million rand for the rest.
375.
375, yeah. Okay, there we go.
And it was only like 9 months later, and people said, this is absolutely crazy. Yeah. And they got paid in shares, which then actually, so the boys made a great amount of money. In fact, there's a great story that Alon, on the day that they did the deal, went to Sun City. And put some coins in the machine and won the $1 million jackpot at Sun City on the same day. And I think it was his birthday as well. And that's
incredible stuff.
So it really did change the market, and it also it gave them scale. It gave them a foothold in terms of this new thing called the internet, and it actually brought in a whole bunch of young, dynamic people. Because David was immediately brought in and put on the Dimension Data board. So they really broadened the intellectual base of the business. It was an incredible acquisition, successful, and it did take a good few years to justify the price that they paid.
Yeah. But in hindsight, worth every cent. Alon, didn't Alon become a professional bridge player? Wasn't he a Springbok bridge player?
He did, and disappeared off the scenes, but he has been doing some, he's a low-key guy.
He's still around.
He is around, and he's in the investment world, he doesn't really, I know one or two of his investments because I come across his name, but he's very discreet.
And Ronnie moved to the Ukraine about a year before the war started there, and I believe he had to flee.
He was there when the Russians came across the border. I've had one contact with him, and the response was, look, I just actually can't talk about it.
Right.
And I really do believe, and there was he did put out some things on social media.
Briefly, yeah.
And I think he'd made a big personal investment because Ukrainian IT was actually really on the up. It was probably a very good decision from a tech point of view. But in terms of whether he's been back, in terms of he's really just gone under the radar on that front.
Some real characters though from those days. This may also be apocryphal, and you hear these stories over the years. So just take this with a pinch of salt. But I heard as well that David Frankel was offered the CEO job of Dimension Data and turned it down and went across to the US, paving the way for the appointment of Brett Dawson as CEO. I don't know if you've heard that story as well. But Dave Frankel's gone off. What's his company called? Do you remember?
I can't recall, but I do think he wanted to emigrate. I certainly believe that he was destined to run the business. Whether he was actually offered it or not, I'm not privy to that.
Sure.
But he certainly was being groomed for the role. But David was I remember going to a Merrill Lynch conference, and I'd invited inter alia David, and then we flew back from New York, the long flight, the SAA flight, the direct long flight.
Yes.
And I remember it was quite funny, there were two lights on the entire night. It was mine and his.
Okay.
We didn't sleep. We just actually worked the whole night.
Wow.
He was an incredibly hard worker. But he's done incredible things in the US. I haven't really been in touch, but I know one story that didn't come from him directly, and that's they were early investors. His fund was an early investor in Uber.
Oh, wow.
And apparently the guy in first round of capital, one of the founders knocked on his door, and David had a plane to catch. And he literally said, I've got 10 minutes. And he said he couldn't get this guy to shut up. He said, listen, I've got to go. I've got to go. And the guy was persistent. Eventually, he said, you know what? I'll take 2 million or whatever it is just to shut you up. I've got to go. And it landed up being probably at that day, the single best investment it ever made. I guess... if you're in the game and you're active, opportunities will come your way. But he really was one of the cleverest, intellectually IQ guys that I've met in the industry.
So Dimension Data went through a fantastic time in the 1990s. I remember Jeremy was the talk of the town for years. He was on the cover of the FM and other publications. Fin Week, I think, or Finansies and Techniek, I think it was called back then. He was the toast of corporate South Africa. And then Proxicom happened, then the dot-com bubble burst, and things got pretty dire, and Dimension Data almost went to the wall. What is your view of the way they managed that period, that the first decade of the century? They really did go through an awful period. Brett Dawson, of course, pulled them through it as the CEO, but there was a whole team there. What is your take of that period in their history? Well,
and there was the tech bubble burst in the early 2000s, and at the time I was running a portfolio, and let me tell you, on that day, we probably had a portfolio of 20 companies, and basically it hit the fan, and every single one of those, it affected every single one of those businesses in a different way. So all of a sudden you had 20 crises, and even solid businesses just basically were priced for failure. I mean, if you look at Cisco, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they might have been the first tech company to hit $1 trillion market cap. And I think even today, I think it is proven to be a great business. It recovered to maybe, the last time I looked, it was maybe $250 million market cap, billion market cap. So still a great company, but it was probably never, the problem is none of these things were worth what they were priced at. And so that was the first impact. Post Y2K and the heyday of all the money that people made. So the first thing is, success was like shooting fish in the barrel for the IT guys in the 90s. I mean, I'd like to say maybe because I was the first and I just happened to identify a sector, and I had my favorites and the ones I didn't like, but even the ones I didn't like did extremely well. So you know what, you couldn't get it wrong.
And there were a lot of listings back in that time, and a lot of them disappeared.
I did Softline, I did Incredible Connection, and they just kept coming.
1998 there was an incredible bubble on the JSE, listings bubble.
That's right.
In fact, it kind of preceded the dot-com bubble by 2 years and then crashed. 2 years before the US market crashed. Almost a precursor to what happened in America.
100%.
And there were companies like Global, a lot of rats and mice.
Global Tech, Fairy Tech, which I was involved with.
Exactly.
There were so many of these, so you've gone from an environment where you can't get anything wrong. And so now it starts to get hard, first of all. Secondly, you've gone from a time where people are throwing money at you to there's no money available. Thirdly, you've just squandered your treasure chest on a bad acquisition.
Yeah.
So now you've got this empire of businesses that are not dimension data, but they've the culmination of 20 or 30 things that you've bought. Now you've got to try and actually integrate them. So this is hard work. So you actually got to get it right. And then I think one of the problems is Datacraft was listed in Asia.
Yes.
And when you looked at the balance sheet, it looked like Dimension Data had a lot of money. But a lot of the money was in a subsidiary where they couldn't get access to it. So some of the businesses that they bought from Roux Marnitz, all of them now started to demand cash. So Brett was the right guy to kind of bed that down, and he did a great job. But then they also, it looked like they were going to go insolvent. And that's when Jeremy reached out to Remgrow and his personal relationship with Rupert, and he got a big loan. Now, I can't remember the exact quantum, but $250 million kind of strikes me as the number. And again, anecdotally, I wasn't there. The deal was consummated at Leopard Creek. And I'm told that, Jeremy was giving his projections, and Johan said, I'm not interested in any of that, because I'm going to have if you're right, I'll get my money back with my coupon. If you're wrong, I'm going to own Dimension Data. And so he gave a convertible loan, and that convertible loan actually, when the conversion date came up, would have meant that Remgrow would have owned in excess of 35, maybe even 50% of the company, but then they would have had to make an offer to minorities.
Right.
So they actually converted it to, I think, 34.9%.
Okay.
And became the single biggest shareholder in Dimension Data. Not a desired outcome, but I don't think it was an outcome that was terrible for Dimension Data.
So Johan Rupert really saved the business.
Saved the business, but then, he now had a stake in the business. And there's a private equity guy, he buys and he sells companies. So his team went and found a buyer, and that buyer was NTT.
Right.
And he negotiated that without engaging with the management team. And he said, after he negotiated, he said, by the way, you meet the management team. And I'm led to believe that created an enormous personal problem between which they subsequently solved. But that the deal with NTT was a Remgrow deal. It was never a management team, which was kind of hard to swallow for people who'd actually created the business, taken it to, and now actually the majority, the controlling shareholder, not majority shareholder, was Remgrow, and they essentially sold it. And NTT bought it not for the Dimension Data, but for specific pockets, and most primarily was the Datacraft business. They wanted that Asian footprint.
Interesting. But subsequently they've decided, they went through a review process in recent years, looking at potentially spinning out and selling the Dimension Data, the traditional Dimension Data Middle East and Africa
business. They didn't potentially look at it. It was actually, it was on paper.
Yeah.
That they had essentially decided pre-COVID that they were going to partially exit the African Middle East area.
Do you have insight into why they changed their mind?
You know what? COVID happened. They put a moratorium on deal flow. And COVID changed the world. CEO changed at NTT. And so you come in, so I don't think there was anything other than, circumstances in the world changed, leadership changed. And when they reevaluated, they said, this is not a clever idea. So they changed their mind, which are, in my view, absolutely entitled to do.
Yeah. Interesting. The NTT team seemed to take quite a hands-off approach post the acquisition. They left the management team in place to run with the business for many years, and only seemed to have become more involved in the last 3-4 years or so. Do you think that was the right approach by NTT from the start?
It's their style, and these big multinationals, they've got to do things in that way. Jeremy was the chairman of the entire stream.
Executive chairman.
Executive chairman. And I think one of the issues, because what unfortunately happened, and I've been through that in my personal career, so the executives in NTT take a decision that they're probably going to disinvest out of South Africa. So management, and it's pretty widely known, it's not engaged with their team and said, well, if you're going to do that, well, we'd like to do an MBO.
Yes.
So that discussion started.
Yes.
New executive comes in and said, this is treason. But it wasn't initiated by the team.
Yeah.
So I think, and actually when Macquarie first sold to Macquarie, I found myself in exactly that situation. You start off with an idea, it's endorsed, people change, and all of a sudden you're no longer you're seen as treachery. And why would it have been seen as treacherous? Well, because if you're a buyer, you're probably negotiating hard.
Yes.
And so if I was sitting on the other side and I'm just speculating,
sure.
You said, these guys, and they've been running my business. I've been paying their salary. They're at my best. Now they want to steal the business for 2 cents. This is they're not loyal to me. And so when
So relations started to break down.
So when Jeremy's reappointment as chairman came up, they chose not to reappoint, which I thought, notwithstanding what has happened, their ways of doing things. And at that point, Jeremy and his entire team just said, okay, well, our time is finished.
Yeah.
And I think it was 2 years ago. It was mid-year. We actually had an interview post that. I think it was June 2021.
Okay. Were you surprised by the lawsuit that NTT filed against the former executives, including Ord, related to the sale of the campus? What was your initial thought when you heard the story?
When lawyers are involved, I'm not surprised about anything. And I'm involved in actually a number of, as an expert witness in a number of different situations at the moment. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised from that point of view. I was surprised at the allegations. These are people that I've dealt with for a long time, people who made a lot of money and certainly didn't need to do anything illicit to make a few extra dime. Having said that, if you run a business as if it's yours and it's no longer yours, you might take things for granted. So hopefully there's a paper trail that says that these things were all known by the execs, and I suspect that's the case. But those execs, I also know that in a corporate, half your staff leaves every 3 years.
Yeah.
So you might have been engaging with a number of people. They might have been well aware of these things. That doesn't mean that the new people that they have come in don't think that this is a bit strange when they look at it through a different lens. So I certainly don't think there was any intent. I don't actually. I think NTT are wasting money.
Okay.
Because the only thing that suffers here is your brand.
Yeah.
And I can't understand how this thing couldn't have been resolved outside of, and again, you get avaricious advisors. It's in their best interest to really blow it up. But I don't have the facts.
Well, let's see if it ever gets to court. No one's been found guilty yet. Let's see if there's an out-of-court settlement, which I personally think is probably more likely than all this dirty laundry being aired in a public courtroom. But we'll know soon enough. The matter is still enrolled at the court currently as of this recording, so we'll see what happens.
And I see also that I mentioned data name will vanish.
Yes, it's already gone.
Yeah,
Now,
so
NTT
that is, to me, probably the saddest of the lot.
Yeah, great South African brand, which is no longer around.